I have the intuitive understanding of it. I have the kinesthetic understanding of it. So I'm finding the right words for it. And I love using language in a very specific way, almost in a surgical way, because we do so much manipulation with language. So my understanding of the world has always been a holographic way of, if anything and everything exists at the same time space, how come that not everything is just a chaotic mush? How is it possible to have infinite amount of realities within an infinitely small and completely volumeless space of nothingness? And then if you start thinking about angles of, it's like a structure, a crystalline structure that has different projection angles, infinitely variable possibilities, and depending on your projection angle. So say if there is a light to consciousness, if there is a light quality energy to consciousness that's not necessarily within the visible light range, but the quality of light in terms of it's a traveling wave instead of a scalar pulsing wave. If that traveling quality of light hits this crystalline structure at a specific angle, then your projection field, your holographic 3D in a sense, that depth, width, height, 3D projection field is going to have the illusion of distance, the illusion of three-dimensionality. And all you're doing is you're shining a light at a specific angle at a structure that has infinite amount of internal angles. So it's a little bit like a diamond that if you were to shine a laser through a diamond in this angle, that angle, that angle, that angle, you would have a different projection field around it. That's how I look at the world. That's like, okay, imagine that at infinity.
Interesting. You've seen it that way, because in the past, when I've thought about these things, I've imagined it similarly. I didn't really put it in words like the idea of a crystal ball, but I did think of some kind of spherical object that when you shine light into it, right where it refracts, it hits and then it bounces. What we're observing is that thing. And I mean, for example, the light that's hitting our eyes. It's first, the light has to come from somewhere. In this case, it's a light bulb, or if you're outside, it's the sun. Before it even gets to your eye, the light has to bounce around an innumerable amount of times to get all the detail of the physical world. And then, and only then at that point, your eyes get the information. The weird thing, though, is that your optical nerve has to take the image that it received and flip it around, or upside down, I mean, and then it goes to your visual cortex. And it has a very important job because it has to render the image. There's also a feature in there to where if you're running, let's say, or if you're walking and you didn't have a stabilization feature in your visual cortex, you would get dizzy from all the movement that's happening in your visual field. So there has to be a flip in the image, and then there has to be stabilization of the image. So we get this smooth experience from it. But it's processing. All that is, the brain is processing it. The trippy thing is asking the question, at what point does that information become observed? And nowhere that you point in the brain makes any sense whatsoever. You would also have to take into account touch, feeling, smell, taste, just all the other senses. So all those bits of information. Yes, they're processed by our brain, but when we question at what point does it become observed or perceived, it doesn't make sense anymore to say it's happening in any one or multiple spots in the brain, because information of the world is different than the material world itself, because we're not observing material objects, we're observing a representation of those material objects. So we're talking about a projective space here. So what I speculate is you have our body, which is just like the hardware in a computer, the microchip. And in our body, there's quantum microtubules that are little tiny structures that vibrate. And I think that, kind of like a radio, what happens is that your body processes this information. They vibrate and they cause waves to go out into the universe. And at a certain point, we have something observing that set of waves. There's something that's observing that, but it's not in the body, it's non-local. So we get into there at the idea of quantum non-locality. I'm not a quantum physicist. I can't tell you the math about this. I never went there, but the philosophy of non-locality is there. And I think that when we talk about non-locality and quantum entanglement, these are properties of the non-physical world. They point us towards a non-physical picture of reality, seen yet unseen version of reality. We observe it with our eye, but we don't actually see it with our two eyes. And so it's tragic for a scientist, because now you can't measure it. There's really no way of seeing it. You just have to take it by a leap of faith that maybe something's there. But I think that through necessity, certain conditions in certain ideas are just necessary in order for this experience to come through. And so I kind of, in the book, I get to some of those necessities in the system, but I'm especially interested in how the observer is in its state of existence and how that 2D plane is even existent in the first place. So, and that goes on to a whole wildly different tangent, because we're talking there then not about creation of the physical world, but creation of the non-physical world. And what I found is that there, I can say that let's say this created everything. Everything that ever existed, everything that will exist, everything that has existed, right here, the tip of my finger. Well, something had to create what's on the tip of my finger. So I say, okay, let's say that it's right here. It's right before this. So right here, this created that. So then I say, okay, but then what created this? So I say, okay, well, whatever created that was before that. And as you can see, we can keep on going backwards forever. And if we go backwards forever, then we wouldn't be here, because something had to eventually create this. And so what you need to do is this, without violating the law of causality. You don't have to violate it. You keep it. You say that there's a finger such that when it creates another finger, another segment, it's not creating a different finger, it's creating itself. So now we get the Ouroboros. You have the snake biting its tail. You're getting a thing which causes itself to exist. And so that means from the very beginning of everything, we had the Ouroboros. That was guaranteed. That had to have been. And if something is creating itself, when you go from here to here, that distance between the two fingers is called time. When you have a finger creating itself now, like an Ouroboros, there is no longer distance between the fingers. So it does so in zero time. So we get this thing to exist in no time at all. We don't even need the Big Bang anymore. We don't need God anymore. This is just a guarantee. It has to be. And so in zero time, the snake bites itself not one time, but infinitely many times in 0 seconds. And that's how you get everything we see. So we start with that. And from there, you can go to other places. Eventually, geometry, because when the snake bites its tail, you get into just insane ideas like the number of times that it did. And when you have that, you also have the stuff that's not the snake biting its tail. You have the tip of the finger, but then you have the stuff that's not the tip of the finger. And so you're creating a sort of like a point, a singularity in this non-physical space. Because we don't have space created yet. It's more primordial than space itself. And so it's just a cascading effect of creation that is its own creator, giving rise to everything we observe in existence. And that's where I find a lot of my interest in non-physicality, is trying to understand those processes, not the processes of nature. I think just basic nature bores me. I spent a long time doing it, and I loved it for a long time, but I eventually realized that nature had to be created. So what created Mother Nature? What created God? What created whatever created God? And just eventually I found the answer I was looking for.